Good evening, all. Pleasure to have you with us tonight for this edition of the Bohannon Show, and a special welcome to our new station, actually a return to our old station in San Diego, KSDO 1130 on the AM dial. We're happy to be there, airwaves, at what is, I'm told right now, that is to say 8 p.m. Pacific time. Good to have you folks with us out there as well. This program tonight is going to be one which some of you may say, I've heard that before. Well, I'm not so sure that you have. You've heard similar things, but I don't think you have quite heard Harrison Edward Livingston talk about his book, High Treason, The Great Cover-Up, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It is a book that is published by Carroll and Griffin. We welcome you to the program.
Thank you, Jim, for inviting me.
Now, first of all, for those who are familiar with High Treason, the original national bestseller, Treason on the best-selling list, described at one point as the most controversial book of its year of publication. We figured, I guess, that you'd had what you had to say. What's new?
Well, this book, as a result of the first book, I was able to obtain very many new interviews from many medical witnesses. The first book, I had not been able to either find or talk to the men from the autopsy. As you probably know, since April 30th, I've produced 6 of those men at 2 press conferences in New York this Thursday and in Dallas. And I was able to solve many of the puzzles in the medical evidence and to expose some what I consider hoaxes and misrepresentation by some of the other critics on.
Well, what about the people, for example, who were brought together by the American Medical Association, who stated that flatly and without question that it was a case of 2 bullets being fired from 1 gun?
Well, give me some time to answer that, because I was at the JAMA conference. I was the only critic there, and as you know, my response was nationally broadcast, and I'm going to spell it out. That so-called article in JAMA is completely a fraud. They had very little interview with the people. There was no investigation. I know all of those doctors. In my book, High Treason 2, have interviews with the autopsy doctors.
Why would these people lie, and what would be the benefit either to the doctors or to the Journal of the American Medical Association?
As you know, JAMA disavowed their connection with the AMA, saying that the AMA was not behind what they were doing with this article.
Let's back up a minute here. That is, the JAMA, for those who don't know the phrase, refers to the Journal of the American Medical Association.
Yeah, well, during their press
conference, is not connected with the American Medical Association?
No, they're definitely connected with it in some fashion, but during their press conference, they stated a disavowal, saying that the AMA was not motivating or instigating this or even condoning it. And frankly, the article is just it's an exercise in propaganda, and the doctor who is the editor, so-called, of JAMA is a military doctor, was 11 years in the military, and I feel that he is protecting the military doctors. And the whole purpose of the article is to head off 2 books. And this case has now come to a boil after the Oliver Stone movie shot its load. I feel almost buried this case, but failed because of these 2 new books.
I'm sure all of this is very well organized in your head, not in ours. You say this was designed to shoot down 2 books. I'd first of all like to know what the books are, and second, what possible vested interest either these doctors or the Journal of the American Medical Association would have in shooting down books.
The AMA has often been called a political action committee. They represent all the doctors in the United States.
But what does that have to do with this conference?
I'm trying to answer your question.
Please
the
do.
2 books are Dr. Crenshaw's book and my book, both of which deal with very specific medical evidence, which the JAMA article, in an oblique way, is trying to discredit, with never actually discussing the points of evidence that we are putting forward in these books, which happens to be what the doctors in Dallas told the Warren Commission, what they told the House Assassination Committee, and the JAMA article even attempts to discredit the 2 autopsy doctors who, in the JAMA article, have actually given evidence that the autopsy photographs and X-rays are forgeries.
Well, this may all be true. Again, you haven't answered the question of what's the vested interest here. I think this would be a lot more understandable to most of us if you could explain why an organization of that magnitude, which had nothing whatsoever, we assume, to do the killing of John Kennedy. I believe we're down to oil men and the CIA.
I just explained to you that the Journal made a statement during their press conference that they were representing the AMA as such when they produced this article.
Fine. Why would anybody involved with those articles go out on a limb to look like a jerk by propaganda? That's what I'm trying to get at. What is the vested interest? Because if in fact you're telling the truth, let me finish my statement. If in fact you're telling the truth, then they're going to look like idiots.
Jim, and if you studied the 2 articles in the New York Times in the last 10 days, you would know that the New York Times started to beat a hasty retreat. Their reporter is a medical doctor. He went to both JAMA's press conference and mine. In between, he read my paper and that of other people showing that there were outright lies in the JAMA article, and if you want, I'll enumerate those. Now, you want to know why they did it. That's not too clear, but I'll tell you my opinion. That detracts. I think we should get to that later.
Well, I think we should get to it now, because I asked you now. I mean, again, we'll get to all that you have to put forth in the book High Treason, too. I'm just trying to understand, why would they want to do this?
Well, my reason for coming here, Jim, is to dissect the medical evidence in this case.
I know.
I'm conducting a major investigation, and I want to get to that.
Well, we're
and
going
I don't
to
feel, I mean, it's like asking who shot John Kennedy.
Okay, I'll put it this way. You are convinced that they did, in fact, engage in a deception. You don't really know why.
Well, I think I have my guess, but that's my opinion.
Well, I mean, would you not
because
want to share
I think that the establishment and very powerful people in the United States are very, very frightened right now because of these two books which give medical evidence showing that the murder of John Kennedy was up by the Warren Commission, by someone who's now a United States senator, not by Chief Justice Earl Warren. I believe that he tricked by this forged evidence.
Okay.
After all,
well,
the
we have
point
to
of
take
my
a break.
research...
We have to take a break. We will come back. We'll get into your research because, again, maybe later on you'll tell us why you think that the journal would be involved in such. But we're way overdue for break stations. We'll take that. We'll come back with more from Harrison Edward Livingston. The book is High Treason 2, The Great Cover-Up, The Assassination of President John Kennedy, which does certainly, to say the least, lay forward some very startling material. So, again, if you have read High Treason and think I have nothing more to hear from Mr. Livingstone, whether you love him or hate him, believe me, he ain't done, folks. So stay tuned. We'll be back after these messages. Our guest tonight is Harrison Edward Livingstone. The book is High Treason 2, The Great Cover-Up, The Assassination of President Kennedy. And, of course, you can, as always, obtain copies of the book's best authors by calling our toll-free number, 1-800-831-8900. You may call that number 24 hours a day and pay with any major credit card, 1-800-831-8900. In the beginning here, you referred to the possibility of what you were as a sort of a minor autopsy at Parkland Hospital before the body of John Kennedy got back to Washington?
Yeah, in the beginning of the book, I given account of various rumors and stories that have been flying around, and which I tried to investigate. There had been rumors to the effect that a post had started at Parkland, but I'm convinced that from all the doctors and nurses that I've spoken to that it did not happen. Dr. Rose has told me that he was the only autopsist present in the hospital and that nobody worked for him. He didn't have any assistant or anything else. He had an office in the hospital.
So in other words, you're shooting down that rumor.
Right.
Well, what about the...
Well, I start with an open mind. I'm just trying to find out what the answer is.
I understand that. You indicate evidence that the brain stem had been cleanly cut through. This was once back in Bethesda, Maryland, which would seem to indicate that the brain had been physically removed from the skull and
I report the statements of one of the men at the autopsy, who I have a lot of respect for. He's a very intelligent man and taught in colleges and so on, where he was the person that infused the brain with formaldehyde, and he felt that it had cleanly severed before it came out of the head. Of course, we know what the implications of that are, but I don't know what to make of it. But simply unable to corroborate it, and I made a massive effort to try to find out, of course, if there had been any tampering to the body.
Is that brain missing?
Of course, it's missing. The House of Representatives, contrary to what the JAMA article stated, that Robert Kennedy buried it with the body, the House of Representatives conducted an investigation of that issue at Arlington and in other respects to try to find out what happened to it, and they're totally convinced that Robert Kennedy did have possession of it or buried it with the body at Arlington.
Does it bother you if the Kennedy family seems to accept the JAMA article?
Well, I haven't heard that particular piece of news, but they've publicly had to go along with the Warren report for a long time. I know.
Why would they have to?
Because the whole point of this conspiracy that overthrew the administration at the time was to overthrow the Kennedys. Joseph Kennedy had riled the establishment when he was made head of the Securities and Exchange Commission by Franklin Roosevelt.
Well, now, first of all, a couple of things here. First of all, if I was the Kennedys and I had just seen my favorite son, father, uncle, whatever, blown away, I don't think that a cover-up, if I knew in fact what was going on, as you say, I would want to be too quiet. I think I'd be screaming bloody murder.
Jim, you forget how many children we've had to take care of. Edward Kennedy is the father, de facto father of the children, Robert Kennedy, of John Kennedy, in those years when they were still small. He had a great responsibility. It was a very heavy load to bear. Yes, they did know it was a conspiracy. There is a private intelligence agency that the great families in this country hire, Intertel and so on, and they knew very well what had happened.
And not a one of them ever spoke up.
Not publicly, you can't say anything.
Why?
Well, because there were too many people being killed and disappearing.
Are you telling me that there were threats to kill other Kennedys?
Well,
if I'm dying, I think I'd just as soon go down with my guns blazing.
Jim, it's hard for me to believe you're sitting right here in the middle of Pentagon City and near Langley and all this across from the Capitol.
I've been in this town since
and aware
68.
that the average senator and congressman will tell you after they've been there a while, they'll say, well, Harry, I'm just a little person here. And they've basically got it their head. They know where the power lies.
A gun at their head. Oh, you keep talking about the establishment,
now tell me something, Jim. You're not getting to the evidence in this case.
Well, we're going to get to the evidence.
All right, well, I'm not going any farther unless start with the medical evidence. We're going to get into
the medical evidence, but I have questions I want to ask you. One of them refers, this question is, if you could tell me about this establishment, which is a great catchphrase that captures the imagination of the conspiratorially minded, but who are you talking about specifically?
Jim, we're going to talk about medical evidence. I'll be glad to do that later. All right.
In other words, you can't define.
No, I didn't come here to give you my opinions. Or what I.
Well, you make reference to the establishment.
To give you new developments in this case.
You make references to the establishment. Can you, in fact, tell me who you mean by the establishment?
Well, let's go back to the 19th century.
Well, I think let's talk about the ones you're talking about in the book.
You don't want to hear what I have to say. You're going to cut me off, right?
Fine. Tell me about the establishment starting in the 19th century.
Isn't it true that 1% of this population owns more than 90% of the wealth and property in this country?
No, that's not true. That 1% owns 90% of the wealth? No, that's not true.
Well, see,
I know there's a portionate spread of the wealth, but no, 1% of the public doesn't own 90% of the country.
Well, that happens to be the fact.
Well, I disagree with that.
That happens to be the fact.
Anyway.
And there's 100 great families
in the United States. Well, the Kennedys are among the people who own a lot of money.
That's
Why would
true.
they?
That's true. There's 100 great families in the United States, and that oligarchy basically rules. Not here in Washington. Mm-hmm. They have far more power than the government, and what you had pertaining in 1963 was a powerful establishment of men, the Petroleum Club of Dallas, and so on, who were vying for power, and they had their brothers and friends in the Pentagon and the DIA and the CIA and so on. The mayor of Dallas's brother was the deputy director of the CIA. Kennedy had to fire after the Bay of Pigs. You had a whole clique in the Dallas area that
doesn't differ significantly
in the government here
from Oliver Stone's conclusions then.
Well, as you know, Mr. X in the Stone movie is Fletcher Prouty, who lives right here, and he is extensively appears in my first book, High Treason. And that material actually comes from what I was presenting, but that's part of the story.
Okay. Let's take our break. We'll come back with more, and we'll just have you start explaining whatever it is that you want to explain about. High Treason 2 is the name of the book. Harrison Edward Stone, our guest, will be back after these messages. Okay, Mr. Livingston, been saying you wanted to plunge into some legal and medical evidence, so go ahead, bearing in mind that we have a break coming up shortly. We'll come back to it when the break occurs.
Thank you. What I deal with are the photographs and x-rays of the body, primarily. And along with that are my marked interviews with almost every medical witness. Nearly everybody that had to do with that body, either us or at Parkland, has spent a lot of time with me. This is another false statement in the JAM article. It's not the first time they've opened up. My book has chapter after chapter devoted to single witnesses or numerous witnesses in one chapter. They've, including the autopsy doctors, they spent a lot of time explaining the evidence to me. My determination is the certain photographs, allegedly of John Kennedy's body and the X of his skull, were forgeries used to trick Chief Justice Earl Warren.
Who did the forging?
Well, we don't know that for sure. Obviously, it came from very high up to be in a position to do this. Now, the proofs of this are the fact that the X of the skull show the right face missing from the midline of the forehead all the way down as far as the jaw in one of the projections. The right orbit, the cup that holds the eyeball, is missing. Right temple is missing. All the bone on the right side of the face is missing. This was in various technical papers presented to the House of Representatives by the image processing computer people from various companies. It was discussed at a meeting between the autopsy doctors and a panel of so-called experts, some of whom, including Dr. Baden, Dr. Baden, are still trying to overturn this evidence.
Why would they go to that much trouble of carving up the head? I don't know autopsies, but
well,
I mean,
the head was not up. The point is that they were trying to show the Chief Justice and certain people that there were shots from behind that blew out the forward part of the President's head. Certain mistakes because this forgery was done hastily. The back of the head, both in the skull X-rays and in the photographs, is perfectly intact. There's literally a bullet entry hole in the colic area of the skull.
What's the colic?
Right here, where your head hair swirls around.
Okay, in the top back.
The problem with that is that the autopsy report placed an entry hole at or near the occipital protuberance, which is the little bump of your head near the hairline.
Okay, keeping that thought in mind, because this is one break we have to take at precisely a certain time, as our listeners out there know. We will continue with Harrison Edward Livingston and his book High Treason 2, The Great Cover-Up, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. This is the Jim Bohannon Show, coming to you on the broadcasting system. Before the break, getting into various aspects of the autopsy which didn't quite jibe with what you feel is established fact.
Yeah, two major points I want to get to. First, I'll finish the last one. The doctors placed an end wound just above the hairline near that bump on the back of the head. That's in the autopsy report. 3 or 4 years later, when these pictures were studied by a panel of 4 doctors, it's called the Clark panel for Ramsey Clark, they found that that wound had 4 inches, 100 millimeters precisely, to the collet. The autopsy doctors protested very strongly to the panel of so-called experts for the House of Representatives, insisting that the pictures, there's something wrong with pictures and the x-rays, that the wounds were not in the right place. It was also in that transcript that all that frontal bone was missing in the head. The problem with that is that every single witness, and Jackie Kennedy and everybody, insists that there was no damage whatsoever to any part of the forward part of the president's head. We know that from some photographs which survived. The major point here is that there was an outright fraud and fabrication in the autopsy report with regard to the neck wound. Dr. Crenshaw encouraged to publish his book recently, which stated that the president was shot in the throat from in front, and it was an entry hole. Now, he's the first doctor to say that. On the day of the assassination, the Parkland doctors were quoted saying that the president had been shot from in front, and they'd also seen evidence that a bullet had entered in the right temple area, metal scrapings. This was also noted by witnesses at the autopsy, that a bullet had come in from that side and scraped the bone. The fabrication of the autopsy report has to do with the fact that no throat wound was known at any time during that autopsy. What they saw was a 6.5 centimeter slash across the throat.
6.5 millimeter, don't you?
No, centimeter.
Centimeter. Okay, that's pretty big.
Trach incision. They did not know that the president had been shot. At least that's their official say. I have a letter from a very prominent doctor stating that he did, in fact, that the Dallas doctors had stated on television that day, as the body was being transported to Bethesda, that there had been a frontal entry hole in the throat. Now, the JAMA article claims that the wounds were carefully photographed and measured, top secret. This is scientific evidence. In 1963, the Secret Service man went back to the Dallas medical witnesses and bamboozled them, saying, well, the autopsy report found that a bullet exited from the throat and entered John Connolly. Even though Dr. Humes then told Arlen Specter, who covered this case, that the bullet could not have been the same bullet that was found at Parkland Hospital. That's at the end of his testimony. He also indicated that a bullet had exited from the president's head and behind. Now, the key thing here is... Before we go any further,
I take it Arlen Specter, then, is the senator you say is part of the cover-up.
Right.
Which is a pretty serious charge. I mean,
yes,
he's accusing treason. Maybe we should dwell on that a bit before you go on to your next point.
You have to ask, what was this lowly consul on the Warren Commission doing, interviewing almost every single witness in this case, all the doctors and nurses, the autopsy doctors, so on. What he did to Anita Hill, he did to those doctors and nurses to try somehow to discredit or change their testimony that there have been frontal shots that hit the president. Okay, that's the issue that JAMA is trying to head off in the past.
Let's get back to motion here. Obviously, Arlen Specter was not a Texas oil man. He was just an ambitious young Pennsylvania politician who, either before or after that, lost several races before getting elected to the Senate. What did he get out of it? Money?
Well, what did the Republican Party get out of this murder? Look what happened to Goldwater, but shortly the whole South folded to the Republican Party. John Connolly became a Republican. Arlen Specter became a Republican. The whole Warren, after all, who was on there that represented John Kennedy's interests, or who you'd say was a liberal or even a centrist? There wasn't anybody there.
Earl Warren has been by some of being, shall we say, a little bit liberal-leaning.
He's been accused of that, but that could be considered questionable. He was a Republican. Even Jack Ruby, in his interview with Chief Warren, as he called him, implied and indicated and innuendoed that Warren was tied up with Teamsters that he knew, and Teamsters.
Are they all part of this, too? We had the oil and the CIA. Are the mobsters and the Teamsters also part of this?
I think that there were used from all these areas. Of course, the CIA had to do with the murder. The FBI had nothing to do with it. The mob, per se, had nothing to do with it.
Are you saying that sarcastically or sincerely?
No, I mean that. it's ridiculous. Mark Lane's position that the CIA killed Kennedy is preposterous.
Okay.
There were a couple renegades involved.
Okay. Well, I didn't want to derail your train of thought, but since we are dealing here with a public program accusing a United States senator of high treason, I thought at least.
Well, I didn't accuse him of high treason.
Well,
I said that
he was involved in a cover-up of facts.
Jim, you saw what he did to Anita Hill.
Well, I put it this way. I came out. Anita Hill.
Jim, he accused her of quote flat-out perjury. He had no basis for that. It was libel, slander. It was absolutely with foundation.
It's one thing to accuse someone of badgering a witness, and it's something else to accuse someone of being involved in the cover-up of a presidential assassination.
No, it's the same thing. If he says flat-out perjury, I'm telling you that he distorted, twisted, changed the evidence in this case, which is de facto cover-up of the murder on Kennedy.
Was he just sloppy, or do you think it was
after the fact?
Was it sloppiness on his part, or overzealousness? I'll pose the question first. Was it sloppiness, or zealousness, or an active participation in the cover-up?
He's either incompetent or it was conscious, active participation.
You don't go any further, though. One or the other.
Well, you could toss a coin. I don't know the answer to that, but I find his behavior very suspicious because he was aware of evidence.
Okay. Well, you have made your charge now. Again, continue with the other problems you have with
the fragments.
Medical.
The fragments. The nurses and doctors have all described to me large fragments that came out of John Connolly's body. There was nothing what's lost from the bullet that came up at Parkland Hospital. There's the
so-called pristine bullet that was found on the stretcher.
A little bit was cut off for the neutron analysis, but there was nothing lost from that bullet. Secondly, there's no military jacketed bullet in the world that will strike bones, especially rib bones, and come out without its nose undamaged or being severely distorted in the process. This bullet showed no sign of any bone. Granted, a bullet like that can go through 2 or 3 people, but it's not going to come out, quote, pristine. Forget all about trajectories and tree analysis and all that sort of stuff. That's not really the issue here. The issue here is big pieces of metal found in John Connolly that couldn't have come from that acoustical test that show indisputably, according to Senator Christopher Dodd, that there were at least 2 gunmen from behind and 1 gunman in front. And
I don't recall Dodd saying that there's
He wrote an article that was appended to the committee report.
That there's indisputable evidence of these extra gunmen?
It's indisputable from the simple facts that you can only fire 2 bullets within no more than 2.5 seconds, no closer than 2.5 seconds from that $14 piece of junk.
Are you talking about the reloading, recocking time? But of course, the first round was already chambered.
Some of the shots on the police dictabelt are second of one another.
The first round, of course, would have already been chambered, so you didn't have to chamber it.
These are 2 shots.
3 times. You don't have to chamber it
2 shots
twice.
within a second, 1 second apart.
Just to activate the.
No, the shots on the tape are 1 second apart, 2 of them. You need 2.5 seconds to work that bolt, aim, and fire the weapon.
Now, I've been in Dealey Plaza, and certainly it is a place that I would think, would do a certain amount of echoes, given the tall buildings in the area. That couldn't be the explanation.
No, because they did computer matchups. In other words, they put microphones through the plaza to study the echoes when they fired a shot, and they tell from the distance it took that sound to go from one to another what was an echo and what was a shot. Secondly, the decibel level, the rifle shot, is far above anything else that it could be, a motorcycle back, anything else.
Okay. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back with more from Harrison Edward Livingston, the book High Treason 2. We'll be back after these messages. Well, we brought up the subject earlier that I said that you were talking about the CIA and oilmen being behind this as the people who caused the assassination.
I didn't say the CIA was behind it.
Okay. I gathered that you were less heading in the same direction as Oliver Stone's movie JFK, for that and such things as the put-downs of Arlen Specter. Now I hear you say during the break that perhaps that's not the case at all. How do you feel about the movie?
Well, I personally intensely dislike it. I don't think it change anybody's minds. I am being told that it has brought a lot of interest from young people that didn't really know too much about this.
Take it as fact.
Yeah, that scares a lot of people. I have many problems with the movie because, first of all, he effectively opted all of the energy in this case and kept out of national exposure the very many researchers, and I mean real researchers that you never hear anything about, often little sung heroes who are working on some computer aspect of studying a photograph or this or that. They are being just brushed aside. None of the important modern discoveries and research in this evidence are in the movie, and he should have known this because he hired certain people that did know it and completely buried, and that greatly concerns me. The movie revolves around, in my opinion, filth and foul-mouthed and certain statements in the movies. For instance, if you haven't had a sexual interest, I'm afraid to say it here over the national air, but if you haven't had that experience behind you, you can't understand this conspiracy. And I paraphrased it greatly there. And I think that that's the bottom line of that movie. We don't need all that filthy language. I mean, in my private life, I'm just as foul as a lot of other people. It made a cartoon out of this case. It made a cartoon of Jim Garrison, who, with his problems, and I don't think he ever should have prosecuted Shaw. He was a giant of a man. He was born in Iowa, brought up Chicago, never had a southern accent. You take a wimp like Kevin Costner, who is a terrible actor, and you make him the star of something like this. It makes a joke out of the whole issue of John Kennedy's murder. The powerful people that think about an important investigation in the Senate aren't going to be moved by this. The whole thing becomes a joke. There's nothing in the files there. We saw Stone trooping everybody down to the Congress to get the files opened up. There's nothing there. The National Archives published a long list of everything that's missing from the archives. It's hundreds of documents.
So basically, no matter what comes out of the archives,
it's a joke. They have stage props there.
People who really pursue the conspiratorial point of view, it's a no-lose situation. If you find something in there that in fact confirms your worst fears, then you win. If there's nothing in there, you can say, well, it was taken out, right?
That's it. You got it.
I mean, so nothing could possibly be released that would ever satisfy. So other things that you bring out in that Kennedy's health was not that good. We knew about the bad back, but there have even been those who would say that he might not have lived out, as young and vigorous as he lived out 2 terms in office.
Yeah, I encountered Navy doctors who were at Bethesda who hated Admiral Berkeley's guts, and they thought he was a drunk. They thought misdiagnosing Kennedy.
He was Kennedy's personal physician.
Yes. In fact, you ought to listen to his oral history sometime in the LBJ. He became LBJ's doctor. And he never discusses in that oral history he worked for John Kennedy. You see, in the autopsy report, there's 2 key things. They don't mention his adrenals, which is always in any autopsy protocol. They don't mention his spine. The JAMA, actually, Dr. Latimer claims that he saw the adrenals on the X-rays of John Kennedy. And, of course, you cannot see X-rays. You cannot see adrenals in an X-ray without administering dye. That's right.
Tissue.
That's it. You have to administer dye. And secondly, in my book, High Treason 2, you've got interviews there with men who were in the autopsy stating that the president had no adrenals. Spent an hour trying to find them. They were totally atrophied. If you have Addison's disease, it's an adrenal insufficiency, but also Pott's disease, which is TB of the spine, causes an adrenal insufficiency. But if you're being given steroids and you have Pott's disease, it will kill you. Steroids are going to kill you anyway for a lot of people. And receiving heavy doses of this, at times you could see it on his skin. When I shook hands with him once, his skin was very bronze and discolored. It wasn't tan or anything like that. He obviously had a problem. He was receiving treatment from doctors. It would have to be highly questionable. No matter who he turned to, a lot of things were done to him, and I'm not sure it was all an accident. The doctors who performed the operation on his back, and they claimed, the operation was a success, but of course they almost lost Kennedy, and he was given the last rites in 1954. Kennedy, forever after, wore a back brace, and in fact was in very pain before he died.
Documented fact.
Yeah. Now, those doctors, he'd been told in Boston not to have the operation because it could kill him, it would do it. And these doctors in New York went ahead and did it anyway, and everybody said, well, it's a success and all that, but basically he lived with the same problem.
We'll take a break. We'll come back with more from Harrison Edward Livingstone. The book is High Treason 2. It is published by Carroll and Graff. It's obtainable, of course, by calling our toll-free 1-800-831-8900. It's a number available 24 hours a day. Any major credit card may be used to pay for the book, 1-800-831-8900. Coming up after news on the hour, we'll get your calls at our other number, 703-685-2177. Back after our guest. The book is High Treason 2, the great cover-up assassination of President John F. Kennedy. You draw parallels, possible links, Watergate figures. Who and in what regard?
Well, it's my belief, and living in the Washington area, of course, there's a big room here, but that cell of operatives surrounding Richard Nixon since the time when he was vice president under Eisenhower were engaged in various murderous activities and the deaths of various people around the world, certain heads of state, President of Panama, and so on.
Well, for example, we're not talking about the Cubans that broke into the Watergate.
Well, I don't want to get specific individuals for obvious reasons.
Well,
you don't want to be sued. I don't want to be sued.
Go as you go in the book.
Well, I'm going that far. You had in the 50s. Remember when Aristotle Onassis made a deal with Saudi Arabia, and he got in a considerable amount of trouble as a result of it. A group actually working in the CIA at the time ran quite an operation on Onassis. They got him a lot of negative publicity in this country. He was prosecuted, and many things happened to him. He did defeat it all, and later on, John Kennedy was killed, and Jacqueline needed to run. She ran to the very defeated this same bunch, whom we believe was involved to a certain extent in the murder of John Kennedy. Onassis was a safe house for Jackie.
Are you saying Richard Nixon himself was actively involved in the assassination of John Kennedy?
Well, no, he was a prisoner of it. He tried to alert people to the fact that he'd become a prisoner. We've had a series of puppet presidents in 1963.
A prisoner of what? By whom?
In 1963, the administration was overthrown by a group of powerful operatives, middle-level lawyers who worked for Lyndon Johnson. Talks of a shadow government. Richard Prouty calls it the secret team. You had a group of officers, other people in the agencies and the Pentagon who sought to control the government from the wings, sometimes with a gun at the head of elected officials.
That's kind of hard to do. I mean, elected officials tend to be headstrong, the checks and balances in the government. It's awfully hard to believe they can.
I don't think they stay that way long.
Money can buy a killer. I won't deny that part of the story is at least plausible. Money can buy a hit team, but
right.
I don't think there's enough money in this to buy this whole federal bureaucracy.
That's right. But our Constitution and the democratic processes in this country have been subverted and invented by people who basically don't believe in our form of government, who are very much afraid of elections.
Now, all this time, from 63, we have been through everything, liberal Democrats right through conservative Republicans, people of all walks of life, all different areas. Well, they come in here, certainly, we will assume, even given your worst scenario, they certainly come in here thinking that they do. Why do they all acquiesce? Do they all enter little rooms and undergo lobotomies? That's not the way people react to this kind.
It's not too hard to get something on anybody or put somebody into a compromising situation.
And they all knuckle under. They all knuckle under. Not a one of them fights back.
Each man's faults when he gets into the Congress. He turns out to be a drunk or a gambler or a womanizer or this or that. And
every one of them.
Well, according to J. Edgar Hoover, who had files on everybody.
Well, he had files on everybody he could, which is not to say that the files necessarily consisted of evidence sufficient to actually blackmail.
Yeah. John Kennedy's mistake thought he was president. He got elected with a sense of stewardship and responsibility toward the public and the voters that put him in.
Why are they letting him?
Up to the time he died, in trying to do his job, basically as he saw it, without being completely thumb and taking orders from a group outside of him.
Why are they letting you speak out? Why are they letting this program go out?
Well, I haven't basically been allowed to speak out. I had to publish my book in the first place.
Well, are you saying the publishing industry part of the cover-up as well? These people do have a lot of tentacles,
don't forget Carl Bernstein's article when he left the Washington Post after the Watergate affair, and he realized that he'd been suckered in the whole Watergate business, that the whole story not yet. He wrote a famous article in the Rolling Stone. It was called The CIA and the Media. Now, you know and I know that they fanned out through the entire film industry, the entire publishing industry,
the CIA?
Agents, military agents, the college campuses. The Pentagon admitted 50,000 informers in the war. During that whole period, when they wanted a war, when they wanted to rearrange the direction of the United States and its foreign policy, you had a subversion of the media, you had a subversion of our democratic processes.
Well, now, nobody has gotten to me.
What we have, Jim, here across this river is a front. This isn't the government of the United States. It's in New York.
Well, you say the subversion. You say the subversion of the media, and again, we're out of time for this to go on record. Nobody has gotten to me. No one has pulled me aside and said, "We have photos of you."
Maybe why I'm on your show, because this is the first time I've been on it.
I'm the last honest man here, along with the Harrison Edward Livingstone. We'll take a break. Come back with your calls on the Mutual Broadcasting System. All right, to your calls to our guest, Harrison Edward Livingstone, High Treason 2. Incidentally, for those who were fearful of that strike against the phone company, they haven't got a new deal yet, but the unions agreed not to strike. I have no problem with the phones. We'll take your calls now at 703-685-2177. For Harrison Edward Livingstone, the book High Treason, lead off with Atlanta. Hello.
Hello, Jim. You got a good show.
Thank you.
Mr. Livingstone, two questions. Will you give us your idea of the 3 bullets or 2 hit the president, and what order and what happened to him? Number 2, have you talked to any of the Secret Service people like Roy Kellerman or William Griggs?
I'm sorry to tell you that the principal Secret Servicemen are all there. Seem to be groups of people that all the medical witnesses are alive, but the key secret men that were involved in that are all dead.
Well, dead of normally acceptable natural or dead
well,
under
not
suspicious
entirely.
circumstances.
Some of them actually shot themselves or simply shot themselves and so on, but the suicides or their deaths were put as natural causes to protect their families.
You have, in fact, evidence to that effect that this was falsified?
No, I'm not proposing that they were right, but it is a possibility always in something like this. After all, Lieutenant Commander William Pitzer was found shot to death in Bethesda Naval Home, and he filmed the autopsy from the gallery. Put it down as a suicide. It couldn't have been a suicide.
What
to answer your other question, the 3 bullets, the president was shot in the neck from in front. We don't know what happened to it. It's thought that somebody pulled it out of there. There was an operation by the Dallas doctors probing to try to find out what happened to it before that they could put the trachea in there. They had to be careful. The president was shot in the back, the level of the 3rd thoracic vertebra. We could see it clearly in the photographs, 5 to even 6 inches down. It's certainly in the base of the neck. We can measure it. It's precisely the same measurement as the autopsy report. He was shot in the head from front, as far as I'm concerned. I think that the backward, the body proves that indisputably, plus other factors prove it. Well, and then the autopsy report claims that the president was shot in the back of the hairline, so that would be a possible 4th bullet. Then, of course, you have John Connolly getting hit, and it could not have been the same bullet.
Now, you have the famous stare of death photograph. Are you saying that was because clearly that face was not hit by a bullet?
No, but that photograph has been retouched in some respects in the throat wound. And the photograph that is totally a forgery is the one of the back of the head. It shows an intact back of the head. There are probably other problems with that picture, the stare of death photograph that you're looking at.
That he was shot from the front. What caused the flap of...
in the back of the head?
The flap of the skull.
Well, he had a bullet entering from the forward of the car that came across the right fender and to the right temple area, and a tangential shot that took off the back of his head.
So small entrance wound, large exit wound, like an M16.
The focus of my investigation and interviews with all of these witnesses shows that actually what they saw in Dallas was the same thing that was seen at Bethesda at the autopsy.
Okay, let's go to Mid-Pines, California for our guest, Harrison Edward Livingstone. Good evening.
Hi. Well, my first question, to pursue what you were just discussing, I must say I missed the first 4 minutes of the program due to a baseball game, so I don't know if you discussed the recent article in the Journal of the AMA.
Yes, we did discuss that.
Well, what I want to know...
He's highly critical of it.
Yeah, well, what I want to know is that got an awful lot of attention in the news media, which I expect given the results reported in that article. What did not covered very much at all was the fact that after that, a news conference was held in New York, in which two men, one of whom who took X-rays and another who photographed JFK.
Can I interrupt you? That was my news conference, and that was Thursday. We attempted to counteract the JAMA news conference, and some did get out. Reuters carried a very good story, but I had much more to tell. And it's the first time that the autopsy have ever been before the national press, and they state flatly, and it happened that took the X-rays and one took the photographs. I had 3 men there. I had 3 other of the men at a conference in Dallas on the 30th. The JAMA attempt is to try to head all this off. They know very well what's in my book and what Dr. Crenshaw is saying, and they're trying now to stop it.
Okay, caller, you had another point?
Yeah, just to wrap it up, I will note that the editor of JAMA is a former military pathologist. I don't know
11 years
to draw, but
well, you have to. The guest did draw that same conclusion.
Yeah. Okay, the other the main one. As you know, over the years, there's been an awful lot of people investigate many, serious and reputable, also a lot of other people claiming to be investigating it who've put out a whole variety of theories. What I would like to know is, and given the which I make, that some elements of the intelligence community called were involved in this, it stands to reason that in order to keep a cover-up intact, they would, number one, put out, have people
co-opt this investigation.
Number two, people theories which could be discredited easily, thereby discrediting the entire idea of alternative ideas of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you do believe the
he's absolutely right.
Crazy theories out there were
he's absolutely right. We had a lot of operatives out there co-opting this case, like the little air book that says a Secret Serviceman stood up and shot President Kennedy. That guy actually had to change the wording of the autopsy report to get his case.
You know, we're talking about a time span now of 29 years. Most of the people who were in positions of power back then to pull this off aren't there. They're either way high up, perhaps too visible to pull that off, or they're retired, or they're dead. It's an awful long time. Sure that they can't keep indoctrinating generations of people coming in to, we have this nice cover-up going. Would you keep it going?
Well, I think it's quite easy to, if let's say you have a second gen in there of very patriotic people. We're all patriotic. We all.
Well, apparently a lot of us aren't, judging by your conclusion.
But we do have opponents, and all somebody has to do is put a bug in their ear and say Livingston is a left, or he's a communist, or he's a dissident, or he's a troublemaker, or he's rocking the boat. Shut him up, you know.
And you're saying we have a pack of little brothers that
person may not be true literate, and he may not be, but there's ways of co-opting. It's like the Tsar set up the first labor unions in order to co-opt that energy and keep tabs on it.
Well, we'll take a break. We'll come back with our guest, Harrison Edward Livingstone. The book is High Treason 2, The Great Cover of the Assassination of President John Kennedy, published by Carroll and Graff. Get a copy by calling 1-800-831-8900.
Here in Jim Bohannon.
Back to the calls for our guest, Harrison Livingstone, High Treason 2. We go to Houston. Hello.
Hi, I'm a former Secret Service agent. I was with the organization years and joined in '69. And we've got up to a thing where we don't talk much, but this is getting ridiculous. Speaking for everybody, just myself. First off, the two who were in the car, the driver and Mr. Kellum in the front, they're both dead. They died in their 70s. What he's talking about in terms of being shot, know anything about, never heard anything like that. The fellows in the follow-up car, to them are still alive. George Hickey, for example, we mentioned, is still alive. Winston, who did the advance to Dallas, is still alive. Clint Hill is still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these men, decent, dedicated people. And, I didn't know all the men on the Warren Commission, but impugning a lot of the integrity of a lot of these people. I mean, it's just getting to the point where it's disgusting. The mercenary side of this, or whatever happens to be the motivation that there's a paranoia that I hear coming through your guest about everything having to do with government and authority anyway. And I think Oliver Stone shares the same sort of paranoia.
Okay, let's let our guest respond to that. I'm sure that you've heard this before, and I think the caller does have a certain point. It is difficult to imagine all of this just sitting out there intact, this great conspiracy that we are run by this secret government, and every administration that comes in is somehow co-opted by magic brain waves or something.
Sir, I really respect your feelings and your opinion in this. Just as I respect any soldier who is wounded or loses his life abroad for whatever reason for his country. But just as President Lincoln's his guard went out and had a drink at the key moment when Booth then shot Lincoln, you have to remember that President Kennedy's Secret Service detail was out drinking until 4 o'clock in the morning. They had very little rest. The driver of the car put the brakes on. You can see the lights on throughout the whole shooting. He didn't step on it until the president's head was blown off. There were a whole lot of things wrong with the Secret Service protection. And, in fact, the House of Representatives made a finding in that respect that it was woefully inadequate. And so, sometimes we have to face the criticism. I may be paranoid. I may be a little bit crazy. I never denied that. I'm afraid of the people that don't know they're crazy or who are above criticism.
Are you suggesting that the Secret Service was actively involved in this, or just sly?
I haven't suggested that, but somebody lured them to that bar. They could have been drugged. I think that it's possible that somebody did betray the president. After all, we know in many assassinations around the world, it's often somebody in the guard. In India, when Gandhi was killed, turned out to be two of the guards who were involved. You can't ensure the political viability of everybody in your protective screen.
Now to Macon, Georgia. Hello.
Yes, I have 3 quick questions.
Well, very quick ones.
Are these books going to be available on Talking Books for the blind? 2.
Well, let's do them one at a time. Talking Books for the blind?
I believe so. High Treason, certainly I signed the papers with the Library of Congress for that, and I'll be sure that Carroll and Graff does the same thing for the new book.
Okay, second one?
2 questions. 1, have you heard, I noticed on Unsolved Mysteries the other week, they had a thing about Robert Kennedy, and so there may have been a second gunman on his killing. And two, if you're worried about these men in power that took President Kennedy's life and Jackie ran away from them, wouldn't you be afraid that they would try to, say, assassinate you and to shut you up? Because you...
I had a government job for a brief period of time, and I was almost blown up in my automobile by a federal employee whom I knew quite well. People play rough
by
in this
blown
life.
up, are you talking about a car bomb?
No, the mechanism of the engine was set to gasoline pouring all over the engine to explode. I knew the guy.
And you know for
well.
A fact that a federal employee did it. Was that person
He was a
tried
friend of
and
mine
convicted?
a person that I worked with.
Was that person tried and convicted for this?
No,
crime?
I never said anything about it. But the point of this is that people play very rough in this life. Lots of people get killed in the United States every year. Several journalists are killed around the world. Many journalists are killed every year.
Somebody tries to kill you. I must say I'm a little different from you. My tendency would be
sometimes the best thing
to go to the
do,
cops, or my first gut reaction would be to take.
Jim. I took care of it my way.
Which
Don't
is what?
read anything into that.
Well, I don't have to.
Okay, we'll go on to the next question.
Well, all right.
We'll go on to the next question.
You took care of it your way. You're not going to tell us what that is.
I don't have to.
Well, you don't
now,
have
what
to.
was
No.
the next question?
No, you don't have to. That's
right.
very true, sir. The next question regards the TV show which recently purported a second gunman theory regarding the assassination of Robert Kennedy.
That's no theory. Several witnesses there saw two other guns present. It wasn't just one. It was two guns present, one belonging to the security guard who was suspected in this. Doesn't mean he did it. But there's no question, because Robert Kennedy had powder burns showing that a pistol had been fired within it 1 to 2 inches from his head. And certainly Sirhan was never any closer than several feet.
That's certainly the thrust of what was on that TV show. We'll take a break. We'll come back with more. Our guest is Harrison Edward Livingstone. The book High Treason 2 will be back after these messages. Hello.
Yeah, hi, Jim.
Hi. Fine.
Very interesting show. I will give you that much credit, but I have a lot of trouble with your guest.
Okay.
To me, he sounds like a tremendous snake oil salesman trying to make money off of the Kennedy assassination. I just wanted to ask him one question. How can you expect to have any credibility with your listeners or your readers when you won't give Jim straight answers to the questions that he's asking you about things that have happened to you? And every time he asks you a question, you don't have a good answer for it. You just refuse to answer it. And that, to me, just destroys your credibility completely. And I'd like to know what you have to say about that.
Clarksville, I think anybody who answers a lot of personal questions on national radio is a jerk.
Well,
and secondly, I'm not
charges.
obligated to do that. I'm here to talk about serious evidence. If you'd read anything that I've written, you would have to deal with that. Personality and character assassination's got nothing to do with anything.
You're under no obligation, no, but the caller does make a point that when you make these sensational charges, that some of these questions might tend to buttress your credibility. Chicago, hello.
Hello, Mr. Livingston.
Yeah, before you go on, I want to respond to what Jim just said. That's a completely false statement. He's trying to attack my credibility by saying that I'm obligated to answer any question whatsoever about my personal life.
Not any question.
No, that's what you're saying.
Not in the least.
No, the caller
Just
said
relevant.
that if I don't answer every question that the man asked me, and I've answered almost every question here as straightforward as I can, but I'm not obligated to answer just anything that's thrown at me.
Well, I don't think I've thrown anything at you that was unreasonable, but what is your question, Chicago?
Well, I think, really to get to the truth of the matter, all you have to do is trace Oswald's connection with the intelligence community going back to even before his days in the Marines when he was a student pilot with David Ferry. Then when he was with the Marines, they trained him in Russian language in Japan. He subsequently defected to the USSR, came back to the USA with no interrogation or surveillance or anything like that. And then he was assigned to New Orleans in a disinformation campaign called Fair Play for Cuba.
Okay, now we've got about 45 seconds.
I agree with that entirely, Chicago, right?
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. Not only did Oswald go to Russia in that time frame, but 9 other men from the Department of the Navy and the Marines in the United States Navy went to Russia, and they were all retrieved at the same time. And then, we ought to talk about the evidence of Oswald's involvement or lack of it in John Kennedy's murder. but he clearly was an intelligence agent. He was totally literate in the Russian language, according to de Mohrenschiltz and others in the Russian community that knew him.
Were the Russians involved in the assassination?
No, of course not.
Well, not necessarily. I mean,
no, there's no possibility of that having happened.
Well,
for one thing, because our entire foreign policy changed when John Kennedy died.
Well, we're not going to. We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. We'll take a break, come back with more, right here on the Mutual Broadcasting System. Back to your calls, 703-685-2177. Our guest is Harrison Edward Livingstone, and his book is High Treason 2. We go to Pittsburgh. Hello.
Hello, Mr. Livingstone.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to, first of all, say thank you very much for being brave enough and willing to speak to the public about what I am convinced, and I hope that most of America is convinced as being the truth of this matter. I'd like to ask you, in light of what's happening presently, based on my belief, and I think your shared belief, that there is an establishment that is attempting to control certainly the events of this country, if not the events, hopefully, eventually, of the entire world, what do you think is going to happen in reference to a sneak guy in the way of Ross Perot sneaking into this election and potentially threatening the control of this establishment? Do you fear that potentially this could be another assassination, a repeat of the 60s in a way? And I'm curious as to whether or not you feel that the Republican establishment party feels that they're really, truly threatened by this. And I'd like to follow up.
Well, all right, go ahead.
First of all, this has got nothing to do with why I'm here, which is to talk about the evidence in John Kennedy's murder. But I will say that because of the fact that the people do not directly control the electoral process in the United States, and presidents are not elected by the people, they're elected by the Electoral College, to have somebody like Ross Perot or anybody come in threatens the system, which has always been a charade.
Well, when was the last
if nobody
time
gets a majority, it goes into the House and the Senate.
Granted, it's an archaic system, but we haven't even had to go to the House of Representatives since,
it's happened.
John Quincy Adams, I think, was
something
the only
like
time. But in fact, the Electoral College is an archaic system. But can you tell me the last time that the Electoral College and the popular vote disagreed and the person with fewer popular votes got elected? 1892, I believe. Or somewhere in that general era.
No, it happened in this century also.
Not when someone got fewer electoral votes. No, Nixon got more votes than Humphrey. Kennedy got more votes than Nixon.
Yeah.
At no time in this century.
But the gentleman's wondering whether or not Perot would be assassinated. I think even though he's a billionaire and it's still not too clear where he's coming from, he is such a wild card that it greatly threatens the system, unless, of course, this is all planned for some purpose. I believe that our political process is being programmed to break down. It is breaking down. The government really doesn't function very well anymore.
You say that Perot might either be a victim of this conspiracy or a part of it, and you're not sure which?
Well, he does come from the Dallas power structure and their motives. I think he's an honorable man. I believe that. I believe Bush is basically
Why
an
should you think
man.
that? I mean, it seems like we're filled with nothing but dishonorable types in your pantheon. Why would you suddenly grant those two men honor?
Well, a lot of strange things happen to people.
If Bush is an honorable man and he's been, in fact, co-opted by this system, an honorable man would step forward. By definition, every president since John Kennedy must be a dishonorable man, or he would step forward and expose this great electoral lie that we're living.
No, they're puppets of it.
Well, if you're an honorable man, you would not be a puppet of it.
You could be an honorable man and be unwitting. Jimmy Carter, I don't think, consciously understood what he had walked into.
How can you be unwittingly out of control? If you're the president and you try to do something that is within your presidential prerogatives and you are circumvented, you fire somebody, you move, you find out what's going on.
Yeah, but when a nation is as old as ours, we have a very Byzantine government. It's the second oldest major established government in the history of the world at this time.
What's older?
They become British government. It becomes very Byzantine after a couple of hundred years, and there are layers and layers and layers of meaning. You have bureaucracies, as they found in England. It doesn't matter if you have liberals elected or conservatives elected. They have no power whatsoever to get the bureaucracy to do something the bureaucracy doesn't want to do. The bureaucratic phenomenon, as the French described it, really takes over.
Well, they keep
And
the
this
things
becomes-
functioning day to day. But
Yes.
you can't say, for
And
example,
this-
that Ronald Reagan didn't change the course of this country.
And the bureaucracy becomes such a weighted anchor in the national life that it can be easily circumvented by very powerful people who can move right around it, do an end run around it.
You would grant you, would you not, that Ronald Reagan
and
changed
move
the
into
course
power
of the country?
vacuums.
Whether it was good or bad, Ronald Reagan obviously changed the course of the country, and it wasn't good for a lot of bureaucrats.
He's bankrupted the treasury of this United
But
States.
that's-
He's done more damage.
I'm well aware of
than we've
the
ever
serious
experienced.
questions about the man, but I'm also saying that he did make major changes, and he clearly was a pain in the butt for a lot of bureaucrats. Now, how come they didn't get rid of him? Because he was a real problem. He was costing them
he
jobs.
was a tool of the people that I'm talking about that wanted Kennedy and people like that out of the way. Reagan represented the big banks, the big money in the United States, big business. The middle class is being destroyed, the small farmers being destroyed. After all, Jefferson said the strength of a nation is directly proportionate to the numbers of its people that own their own farms, their own homes, and their own businesses. And that's not what this country is all about today. It's about big business and conglomerates.
We go to Omaha. You're on the air. Hello.
Thanks, Jim.
Sure.
Hey, a little bit of leeway. First of all, Jim, what's the phone company that doesn't cut you off every 4 minutes when you're ringing?
Well, I'm told that these two don't. Sprint, which has a 10333 access code, and MCI, which has a 10222 access code.
Because Monday morning I'm switching. But
Well, you don't have to switch, you know. You just dial those numbers and you're automatically on them.
yeah, that's okay. AT&T, though, can take a flying leap.
Well, whatever. I mean, you know, we're just here to help you get through.
You
What do you have for our guest?
I think big-time bull, because 19 out of 20 neurologists at the House Select Committee on Assassination said that the backward motion of the head was a natural reaction. And, Jim, if is the guest near...
No, you made that up, sir. You made that up.
I read that in, if I'm not mistaken, GQ, or one of those magazines about Oliver Stone's meeting.
Oh, that's a men's model magazine?
Well, I've certainly read the charge that there are pathologists who have made the statement that the head motion in the
neuromuscular
film can be explained by a shot from the rear. Now, I grant you, to the layman's eye, that doesn't look obvious, but I have heard such a statement as the caller is saying. I don't know about the 19 out of 20.
It's completely unscientific to respond to your charge. That's a totally ridiculous concept. The human head is not an engine, and you cannot have a jet effect from it unless there's combustion of a high octane fuel or a kerosene, something of that nature. And there can be no neuromuscular snap when the head is hit, and it's attached to a neck and a body weighing 100 and some pounds. It's just not possible. The stories that you heard about this kind of thing are completely unscientific. I have seen numerous films of executions of men at posts who are shot in the head, and believe me, the head goes with the bullet. There's just no way. If you're hit in the stomach with a bullet, your head may go forward as your body bends backwards. Your abdomen will be thrown backwards with the bullet, so your head comes forward as you double over. But if your head is hit in men in battle, they're taken right off their feet and they go backwards with the bullet.
Okay, caller?
The thing is, you're calling my statement ridiculous, and you have no knowledge of this. I mean, I know you looked at the photographs and all this, and you write books, but I could write a book too, and I could make all kinds of things up like you do.
Go ahead.
That doesn't give me any more credibility than you are. And I would say that neurologists, doctors, and the people that said it have more, even if they didn't look at anything, than you do.
Let me respond to that by saying what I'm dealing with here is primarily things that I can prove absolutely, and that is forgery of photographs and x-rays. You get this material and study it, and you'll see what I'm talking about, because the x-rays show that the face is missing and the photographs show that the face is undamaged. You find a way to explain that. They can't find a way to explain it, so they come up with phony articles. And what you're giving me is a phony explanation.
We'll take a break. We'll come back with more. Our guest tonight is the author of the book High Treason 2, and it is published by Carroll and Graff. And if you want to get a copy of this book, all you have to do is write.
Here again, Jim Bohannon.
More calls for our guest tonight, the author of the book High Treason 2, Harrison Livingstone. Of course, he also wrote the bestseller High Treason, and this one is published by the folks at Carroll and Graff. It's subtitled The Great Cover-Up, The Assassination of President John Kennedy. Here's Columbus, Ohio. Hello.
Yeah, do you think there's a possibility that Kennedy got hit in the head with a rock, man?
With a rock?
Yeah. Not as hard as you did, no. But
believe me, you could stand up on that grassy knoll and hit him with a brick. It's that close. You don't need any kind of a rifle or a sight.
That's one thing you don't know about that because of the angle of the camera shots that took place that day. But my first impression when I entered Dealey Plaza was, gosh, this is a little teeny place.
Yeah, and another point about that, if you were standing in that window trying to fire down on the car as it came out from underneath that tree, you're actually firing almost straight down on it. It's an all but impossible shot. What you see in all these trajectory analysis, computer projections, and all this kind of stuff, I think it's silly. If anybody was going to shoot at that car from that window, you would shoot at it as the car approached the window. You only have to move the barrel of the rifle a few feet from one direction to the other, and it was a very simple shot to shoot at it as it approached you. I don't believe anybody fired from that window.
What was Lee Harvey Oswald doing?
He was eating his lunch in the lunchroom. He was actually seen there a couple minutes before the motorcade.
Does it matter then that he had connections with the Russians? Was he or was he not a part of this whole thing?
I think he may have known something about it. In fact, I think he had the impression that he was spying on it for the government, on a conspiracy. But the conspirators were able to set him up in that fashion. He clearly was an intelligence operative, as your caller said a little while before. But he had no powder burns on his face. There were no fingerprints on the weapons. The Heidel identification was not on him when he was arrested when he was first taken into the patrol car. The chief of police said they couldn't even place him in that window. They couldn't even go on to trial with him. It's well documented now that he very much revered John Kennedy. World of him. Obviously, he wouldn't be shooting at John Connally if that was his target.
He was part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee, right?
Well, I mean, I did that job for the government, too, when I worked for a newspaper.
What about the picture of him with the rifle?
Marina Oswald has insisted to us that she was standing underneath that stairway when she took pictures like this. She did take something like this, she says, but these aren't the pictures. The pictures are clearly forgeries.
We go to Atlanta.
Actually, Jim, almost everything in this case is either planted, forged, or stolen.
Which again involves a lot of people. But Atlanta, you're on the air. Hello.
Jim.
Yeah.
I'm surprised at your impatience, and I think this is a very difficult subject, I understand, but you really are not. You jump from one subject to the other and don't let the man explain things.
I've given him all night to explain things, caller.
You know, you're doing that to me right now. I'm telling you.
Well, if you want to critique how I do the show, you can do it on open phone. You've got something to say to Mr. Livingstone, you can say it now.
Well, what I have to say to him is the only problem I have with him is that I think he's a little bit disorganized with his material, and but the evidence is there, and I support what he's doing. I support everything that the evidence that he has.
Okay, you have a question for him, or something you'd like him to respond to?
But I'd just like to tell him, that I think he should work on presenting the material better, because I know what he's going through. This is a very hard thing to present.
Okay, your response, Mr. Livingston.
I think the gentleman is quite correct. I do get slightly disorganized when I'm under a lot of strain from people that are asking all sorts of questions all over the block, and I can't concentrate on the basic areas that involve my research and where I'm trying to get out new information in this case. When they just want to hear opinion about this or that or my life story, yes, it becomes quite confusing, and it's unfair to the listener, but that's the way America operates.
We go to Austin. Hello.
Hi, I'd just like to point out regarding reluctance to answer questions that you had to ask your first two questions 3 times before you got an answer to them.
So does this discredit my research and my writing?
I think that it makes it very questionable on the grounds that you seem to not want to talk about answers to his questions.
I've answered all questions except the color of the hair on my chest and other kinds of questions that I don't feel are appropriate.
And reluctantly on a couple cases at least. I didn't like Oliver Stone's movie because its sole purpose, as far as I can tell, like so many of his movies, is to sow discontent through unproven and purely speculatory evidence, as far as I can tell. And if anything constitutes high treason to me, that's it. You have stated that the democratic process is subverted by blackmail, I think, anyway. And by doing so, you have now classified yourself, in my mind, as being guilty of such treason. So tell me...
because I questioned how things are going in this country?
I am not going to read your book until you clear yourself of such a statement. So tell me, what is the
statement?
What is your whole purpose behind doing this? Is it to get the facts out? Is it to expose somebody of the very few who are still in politics? Or why should I give a damn about who killed Kennedy anyway?
It's not necessary for everybody to have the same degree of caring that we have. I worked for a man who became a U.S. Senator who was very close to John Kennedy. We care. We're not going to get over this murder, the great tragedy that it brought this nation and the very many people who believed in Kennedy and what we lost. It's a hard thing to live with. Believe me, I don't make any money out of this. I hire police officers. I pay a lot of people. I have a major research operation underway. I don't really give a damn if you care or if you don't care. But there's plenty of people out there who do care and who take this very seriously.
And you can count me among that number, too. I would have to disagree with the caller and in fact, agree with our guest. One of the rare occasions tonight, I damn sure care. And if there's something to this, then we ought to get to the bottom of it. There should be no statute of limitations on blowing away presidents. Omaha, hello.
Hi, Jim. I was kind of irritated at the beginning of the show, but I've got to thank you now because this has been pure entertainment. I've enjoyed every second.
Well, I hope it's been a little bit of information, too.
I don't know about much information, but it has been entertaining. It's
okay. Well, I'll take that.
Very funny. Sir, as far as I had made a promise to myself not to listen to any more shows concerning the Kennedy assassination and things of that nature, just because I've heard nothing but accusations made, and I don't know whether there was a conspiracy or not. It wouldn't surprise me if there was, but I decided I wasn't going to listen anymore until there was good proof. Now, Larry's promo the other night said that you were going to present not accusations, but just merely facts that you had found. All I've heard tonight is pure accusations. The few facts that you have presented, I question with your ridiculous multi-government conspiracy theories. And the main question I have to ask for you is, how could you still be standing if all of these ideas and this conspiracy is so large? How can you be standing there making these accusations and still be living today?
I mean, if they're willing to kill a president, why not you?
We're into another generation here, and when certain people died whom we believe were involved in the conspiracy, a lot of us breathed easier, but there were a lot of deaths, as you know. Secondly, I have some backup at this point. There are powerful people in my corner, too. I would like to say that if you study my writing, I think you will find plenty of information. But I'm on a radio show here that has multi-purposes. And I don't necessarily say it's wrong.
What do you mean, a radio show that has multi-purposes?
The gentleman said it's very entertaining. And that's show business.
Well, that's not. I'm not here to conduct show business. Yeah. And anyone who's listened to me for the past 11 years knows
let me answer a specific point here.
Well, I'm sorry.
I try to present hard evidence as best as I can, but obviously when that evidence points toward a conspiracy and it's pretty conclusive, then I'm under pressure to explain. Well, who did it? Why did it happen? So I try to be honest with that. If I was to shut up about it and not answer it, then you'll criticize me for that. So I'm in a no-win situation here. And so I try to treat it straight, knowing that I'm going to take it in the neck for it, but nevertheless I'm going to tell people what I think if they push me hard enough. And I've come for great criticism for doing that. And I always have had a lot of criticism for that.
We'll take a break. We'll be back after these messages. We'll get back to our calls here shortly for our guest tonight, Harrison Edward Livingston, the book High Treason 2, and it is published by Carroll and Graff. You can get a copy of this by calling our toll-free number, 1-800-831-8900. 24 hours a day, you can call that number, pay with any major credit card, 1-800-831-8900. You wish to say something briefly about your research?
Yes, Jim. I have been, in my book, High Treason 2, and the first book, I've been introducing entirely new evidence in the conspiracy that murdered John Kennedy, and that deals with the forgery of the autopsy materials, and that this material was used to trick the Chief Justice of the United States. Nobody else has been really dealing with this on the level that I have done with many interviews of witnesses and the studies that we made of this material.
All right. We go to Little Rock now. Hello.
Little Rock. Hi,
yeah.
My name's Bob.
Uh-huh.
it's not just the conspiracy with John Kennedy, but the upcoming Earth Summit, the conspiracy with George Bush, and all the things he has not been as an environmental president. How does this play into, the whole thing?
If at all.
Well, I'll let Jim answer that question.
Well, I don't know of any connection whatsoever. Okay, I think we've found a fellow with an axe to grind. Which is certainly an axe worthy of grinding. We'll talk about that maybe during open phones. Toronto, you're on the air. Hello.
Yes, I got a few quick questions.
Okay, we got time for about one, maybe. We'll see what we got.
Okay, I just wondered, first, is the author aware of a book, Double Cross, about this whole...
Yes, I know the author. He lives in my town. It's a phony book. He claims that a Secret Service man stood up and shot the president. It ignores all the other shots that were fired. And that author had to change the wording of the autopsy report, which you'll find quotes for in his book, actually just change the language of the autopsy report in order to get the trajectories that he wants.
The last 2 points quickly about Dorothy Kilgallen, the scenario there about the judge, Joe Brown, and that she had an interview with Ruby that no one else had, therefore she had to be killed. And you said that his face had been damaged, but I thought there was just...
Undamaged. His face was undamaged.
30 seconds.
Yeah. His face was undamaged. The skull X-rays show that he has no face on the right side. It's completely missing. So there's a big conflict between the X-rays and the eyewitness testimony and the photographs. None of it jives.
Interview with Ruby.
The Ruby interview with Kilgallen. Not only did she die, but her friend died at the same time, and many other people died, of course.
And, of course, we have run out of time. We want to thank you for being with us tonight.